Hello, Francis.
Hello, Jason.
How was your weekend?
It was good.
It's good. Keep up with NBA free agent rumors?
Yeah, I did.
You kept up, all of them.
I mean, it's not hard to really keep up when it's just on placidly crossed that Blake Griffin and Chris Paul opt out. And
give me every free agent rumor. Go.
Kristaps Porzingis.
No, why you dick? Go. Next.
Chris Paul to everyone.
Yeah, mostly just the state of Texas.
Yeah.
At least as of right now. So keep in mind one thing. He was always opting out. So was Blake Griffin. Any player who does this is smart because in like the loyalty aspect, sure, but he can always sign with the Clippers. It's not like him opting out means he's leaving the Clippers. They can offer him a lot more money to the tune of about $50 million more than any other team can. Teams also have to be worried about the fact that when you sign Chris Paul for the $25, $30, $32.5 million a year, almost all the contracts are back-ended, which means the most amount of money is going to go to Chris Paul when he's 36, 37, 38 years old, or 35, 36, 37, 38 years old. So there's some risk to it because he's not in his prime. He's still one of the best point guards in the league without a doubt, and could still make an immediate difference and make a team a contender, or more so of a contender, I'd say, for the next 2-ish years. But he's had his health concerns, and so has Blake Griffin. But these aren't reasons why you wouldn't throw all the money towards him. These aren't not reasons why you shouldn't be going after Chris Paul. So the Clippers, I still think, would be the front runners, but not by much, because the Rockets have a tempting offer, I'm sure, in place if they can clear the space, and so does the Spurs. It's only going to come down to who Chris Paul feels he has the best chance, I think, to win a championship with, because his window is running out. The Spurs have a better chance than the Clippers next year winning the championship. The Rockets and the Clippers, depending on what the Clippers do this offseason, and my assumption that the Rockets will not be as good as they were last year. I think last year was amazing, and what James Harden did was phenomenal, but with all these guys in the trade block, Beverly, I don't think they're going to be as great. They'll still be a playoff team, without a doubt, and still threatening. You're Chris Paul.
My thought, if Chris Paul was to look to anyone, I think the Rockets should stand out to him as both a good fit for him and a good fit for the Rockets. Because one thing you have to highlight is Chris Paul has the ability to make anyone even better, right? So James Harden, already MVP candidate, we'll see he's probably more likely going to win. So just think about how much Chris Paul can elevate his game. Because Chris Paul is not a score-first point guard. He is like an OG previous wave of point guards where you look to try and get other players involved and make them better. So I think that if he stays with the Clippers, they need to add more weapons to that team, because of course they're falling short in every hurdle. But if he goes to the Rockets, in my opinion, they leapfrog with keeping the team they have and the depth that they were able to show throughout the playoffs. Yeah, they fell short to a far better team overall, like in consistency-wise, in the Spurs, but they definitely surprised everyone the way they came out firing, and they destroyed them in the earlier stages of that matchup. So I think if they had someone like Chris Paul, who's able to utilize James Harden and Beverly and other players in there that can take that team further, Nene, then I think that, I just like saying that name, Nene. Then I think that the Rockets leapfrog. They're already ahead of most teams in the Western Conference. And I mean, we'll see what happens with the Timberwolves now that they've added.
The Timberwolves are winning the West.
Yeah, they've added Jimmy Butler. But if they haven't leapfrogged the Spurs by adding Chris Paul, they're right there next to them, depending on what the Spurs do, in my opinion. Now, some may argue different. So I think it's a good fit for him. If he stays with the Clippers, then it's just the same question what we had last year, and the year before, and the year before. It's like, oh, what's Doc going to do? Is he going to give Blake Griffin the keys and just say, right, we'll see what happens in the final quarter with him? Or is he going to add someone else to help Chris Paul, an elite scorer that's scoring on a regular basis that Chris Paul can help take to the next level? Because if you let Chris Paul go, then that team has to rebuild. If you keep him, he's not going to. You're not going to change much unless you add someone else with them, because the pieces you have at the moment are not fitting.
Yeah, there's options out there too. It's not like you can't go find some value options for the Clippers to at least put together guys who can create. We've been talking about this for a minute now, and also some of the elderly guys got to move. Love Jamal Crawford, but he should find a way to swap him for somebody.
Go to the Knicks.
Totally welcome to come back to the Knicks. I'd be thrilled with that. Get my Jamal Crawford jersey back wearing. Putting it back on, I should say. But the The interesting thing with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin too, it's just a matter of whoever decides first. I think is going to affect the outcome of the other. If Paul says, July 1st comes around, I'm signing with the Rockets, I think Blake goes too, because I think the Clippers would want to rebuild at that point because they're not going to have enough there, and possibly vice versa. If Blake leaves, who knows? Maybe they run the pick and roll with DeAndre Jordan and do the best they can with that, or maybe it's just DeAndre Jordan left on the Clippers, which would be funny because like 2 years ago or a year ago, and all the emojis and everything that happened. Having said all of this, neither the Rockets or the Spurs are necessarily play up to Chris Paul's game. Chris Paul would have to adjust. If he went to the Rockets, he'd have to speed up everything about his game to fit into that offense. I'm sure they would tweak things to work around Chris Paul's game. It's that good. But with the Spurs, the Spurs basketball where it's rarely ISO sets and always look for the extra pass and never hold on to the ball for more than 1.2 seconds. It's the opposite of Chris Paul. The only knock on Chris Paul has always been he's an over-dribbler. He takes a lot of time off the shot clock. He slows the game to a halt, which he has worked into his favor and has mastered that. But both the Rockets and the Spurs, there'd have to be some tweaks made. I'm sure the high IQ of Chris Paul would be able to fit into any system in the NBA, and it would be interesting to see what would happen if he did get sped up, and to see if he would be able to still, have those 0 turnover games, those 1 turnover games with 20 points and 15 assists and all these things.
Well, the difference about Chris Paul if he moved into either of those two teams is that he doesn't necessarily feel like the weight is on his shoulders, because whenever Chris Paul comes out of the Clippers, their game immediately drops substantially. But what you've seen from some of the best teams in the Western Conference is they're able to maintain a decent standard when some of their best point guards come out. Steph Curry comes out, Livingston is able to maintain a decent standard, if not at times take it up or down. And when you see the same thing happens with when in the Rockets, is they could utilize Chris Paul as their starting point guard, but they have pieces in place to make sure that the game doesn't drop so substantially. When Chris Paul comes off for the Clippers, then it's immediately he has to come back in and try to make up either a point differential or maintain a standard, because it's something that the Clippers haven't been able to do.
Rivers was okay last year.
I thought he had a good year, but you're relying on him to get hot and to keep a standard from making shots from 3 or whatever it is.
You're not winning playoff series with Austin Rivers as your point guard, at least your starting point guard. In addition to all of this, Ricky Rubio is on the trade block again. Patrick Beverley's on the trade block as the Rockets. Not just Beverley, the Rockets are trying to swap whoever they can to aggressively, as they put it, the reports put it out of the Houston Chronicle, aggressively pursue Chris Paul and offer him the farm. Also, James Harden moved back to shooting guard, which is like, because we moved him to point guard, oh my God, the Mike D'Antoni effect on point guards in the NBA. And then like after a year where he possibly wins the MVP at the awards tonight, he's right back to being the shooting guard.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with that. But then additionally, and lastly, I should say really for this one, the Cavs, Nuggets, and Pacers were that close to finding a way for Paul George and, believe it or not, Kenneth Faried to both land on the Cavaliers. And the Pacers would have probably gotten Gary Harris, maybe a pick, and the Nuggets would have gotten Kevin Love. And it didn't work out. And I think the Pacers have Danny Ainge syndrome. They don't want to pull the trigger on a lot of these things. And the problem is if they keep waiting, Paul George's value goes down over time. If you wait and nothing happens this summer and then you try to find a move at the deadline, you're going to get a shit ton less value. Because guess what? In 4 months after that, your shiny new rental car for the postseason is walking to the Lakers. Unless that's what he's going to tell you. That's what he told his locker room at the trade deadline. That's what he told his locker room today. That's what he tells the management. But what has the management done for the Pacers? So they need to make a move, and Gary Harris is a type of guy you should get from this Paul George trade. As a young guard in this league, the Pacers need somebody to build around. They passed on Harry Giles in the draft. They passed on the high-risk, extremely high-reward player in favor of somebody who's not as flashy. And you need to at least revitalize the franchise. This is another franchise that is rooted in history, torturing the Knicks, but still rooted in history. So who knows what's happening with the... Again, I think this all stems back from the fact that they fired Frank Vogel like a year and a half ago. That was the biggest problem. I think that's where it started to go really downhill.
Well, if you're the Cavaliers...
We gotta move.
I mean, I get that certain trades are complicated, and especially when you fire your GM conversation.
That's right, they have no GM.
So that's maybe part of the reason why these negotiations are breaking down. There's literally no one there to pick up the phone. The phone is just ringing.
Who's sitting there, like the secretary?
They're all like, what are we supposed to do?
Pick up the phone?
It's not answering. So they lost out on Jimmy Butler, right? I've not read up on as much detail as to how close they were to getting him or whether it was realistic or not, but as far as they're looking to compete, like as stubborn as LeBron James might want to be in terms of, no, this team we've got are good enough to beat the Golden State Warriors, they're not. So they need to either add a Jimmy Butler or a Paul George. So I'm surprised they're not moving mountains to get Paul George.
Or the Knicks buy out Melo for $54.2 million. It's like a reverse transfer fee. The team pays the player to walk. So, a release clause. And then Dwayne Wade and Team Banana Boat, or as somebody tweeted me, Big Bad Banana Boat, goes to Cleveland. Who cares? Sure. At this point, sure. Just yes. Comment below.